A new documentary tells the truth about school closures during the pandemic, and it should anger you. 15 Days is the story of how teachers' unions teamed up with progressive NGOs to use the health crisis to reimagine society using our families, our children, as guinea pigs. It's called 15 Days. It comes from Restore Childhood. Natalya Murakhver is the founder of Restore Childhood, and she joins us today to discuss it. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much, Natalie, for having me.
Now, the documentary is really upsetting, and I think it's because a lot of us have kind of blocked it, what we've gone through and what people put on our children. Why do you think it is important to bring this back up now?
Well, I think that what they did with the school closures has not really ended. I don't think the schools that our children left in 2020 were the ones they returned to. And in fact, many kids didn't return. There's still incredible chronic absenteeism. The teachers' unions always kind of wring their hands and say, well, we don't know where the kids go, but actually we drove them out. Additionally, there hasn't really been any kind of accountability. Randi Weingarten is still orchestrating. She's written a new book. She is not taking any responsibility for what happened. Her motto is kids are resilient, but actually our documentary is dedicated to a young man who took his life just this past May because he struggled so much with mental health issues when schools shut down. And he's not the only one.
Right. I think about what really hits me is all the things that kids didn't have. There's a joke, and isn't it a joke in Pretty in Pink that if you miss your prom, your whole life will be ruined? Like these are things we cannot give these kids back. There's no resilience to taking things from these children. So you make it clear in the documentary that, there were a lot of sort of militant teachers and organizers and administrators just going along with what they thought was right. But there has to be a bad guy behind the bad guy orchestrating this, or else independent thinkers would not have done this. Or maybe, as I say that, I think maybe that's the problem, is that our education is not filled with independent thinkers. Can you respond to that?
I think that I don't really think of it in terms of good and bad. I think that there were agents who were working for these NGOs who probably felt like this was a great opportunity to achieve the good that they envisioned, which may not be your or my idea of good, whether it's environmental justice or racial justice or, gender justice, any of those justices that Randi Weingarten talks about. I do believe that there are people, on the progressive left, and I speak as still a registered Democrat who was a progressive her entire life. I went to NYU, undergrad, grad. I worked at the film school, was always very, very involved in the arts community. So these are my people. So I have to see that there is some good in what they've been trying to accomplish. I think the problem was the leadership and people like Randi Weingarten, who likes to fashion herself a teacher. She is not a teacher. She is a mob boss, essentially. She doesn't really speak for the teachers. Many of the teachers we spoke with, and some of whom we interviewed, actually did want to go back to school. They were constantly being told by the head of the union, Randi Weingarten, and the people below her, who she trained and gave talking points to, that it wasn't safe and that they would die in those classrooms. When in fact, views like those of Scott Atlas, we were very lucky to have him in the film, he was actually looking at the data and saying, hey, hold on a second. This is an age stratified disease. If anything, teaching in the classroom is the safest thing you can do because you're all mostly, around 40 or under 40. Teaching is a very young profession. So, I think the people who use the crisis, like Jane Fonda, who said, COVID is God's gift to the left. I didn't know that during 2020. Only in research for this film did we figure it out. But I think there are, some nefarious actions, but I don't want to categorize every actor as bad.
But what do you think they wanted to reorder society? I mean, I remember I was a liberal at the time too, and thinking like, oh, it's so nice, there's no single serve plastics being used in the school for a couple of months. That's kind of like, now I look back and think, what a stupid thing to say, because I didn't understand the nature of plastics. We were lied to about that. And, that kind of stuff where we thought, oh, okay. I mean, we were living in Portugal at the time. Antonio Costa was the prime minister and said, well, this will help us reduce our dependence on foreign imports. They didn't do any of that. So beyond that, what else do you think could have been an agenda, climate, what have you? Can you play that out for us?
I don't know exactly. I mean, we're seeing it right now with the chaos in the streets and these activist groups. I mean, I in the past, like I was, I supported BLM. These were all causes I understood. I wanted racial justice, but I feel like there are groups that just weaponize any sort of crisis, and if they don't have a crisis to weaponize, they manufacture one. And I think
Mm-hmm.
while COVID was dangerous, certainly it's an age stratified disease for older people, overweight people, certain, genetic predispositions. There certainly was danger and a lot of death and casualty from COVID. I'm not minimalizing the virus or any virus for that matter. I think that they saw an opportunity to progress their agendas, whether it's environmental justice, and I mean that encompasses a lot of things, whether it's plastics or reducing the number of cars on the streets. I mean, I live in New York City. We have congestion pricing in Manhattan now. It has not reduced the number of cars. It has placed the burden on lower and middle class workers who need to drive into the city to come in and do work here. Some of them can't take the subway. The subways have also become really dangerous. Even as a New Yorker, I can tell you, I don't feel as safe as I used to on the subway, and I've spent almost my entire life here. So I don't really understand to what end. We hear about what Soros looks for, open societies, having chaos, restructuring things. It's not my vision. I think we have an incredible country, and I'd like to see it preserved.
Let me ask you something. How much time do you spend every day on a web browser? How much time do you spend clicking around online, searching, scrolling, typing, endless tabs? It's a lot, right? Well, there's a new AI web browser from Perplexity called Comet that is completely changing the way you're able to interact with your browser. Using Comet feels like having a personal assistant living in your web browser that can actually do things for you across the internet. Yes, actually do things, not just give you answers. You can ask Comet to handle tasks for you, and it literally clicks, types, searches, and scrolls just like you would to get things done for you in the background while you go about your day. Comet can actually shop for you. Oh my gosh, I shouldn't tell my daughter about this. It can make reservations for you. It can book travel for you. It can summarize articles or videos, send emails, schedule meetings, and a lot more to make your life easier. Let me show you how it works. So for example, you could type or say, find a great Mexican restaurant in Austin next Wednesday at a time that fits my calendar, book it, then send a calendar invite and an email to my colleague, John, with the details. Pretty cool, right? So download Perplexity's new AI web browser called Comet today by heading to pplx.ia/redacted and let your browser work for you. Plus, right now, when you download Comet, you get a month of Rumble Premium for free. Again, that's pplx.ia/redacted. Go now and take back your time online.
But it seems to me, anytime you look into an NGO in the United States, the end result is to distribute power, so they say, but remove it from the individual. That's how I feel about it. And so this idea of weakening an already weak education system plays very well into a control mechanism. And when you see these kids struggling to learn, to get an education that already was not up to an academic excellence, I don't know how you can see it otherwise, but I can't put a grip on who did that on purpose. Right? Do you think your documentary reaches out to that question?
I think so. They were in March. I mean, we have a really, I think, very important clip in this film of a meeting in March 2020 that happened between many of the progressive NGOs, Randy Weingarten and Jane Fonda, where they talked about how to usher in this new version of society, I guess a more just, a more, sane, environmentally conscious version. I think we were actually a pretty great society then, and I think it got too good, personally. Not saying the
Yeah.
education was perfect, but I think it was pretty good. Look, I come from the Soviet Union. I was born in Odessa, which is Ukraine. It was the Soviet Union in the 70s. I came here as a 6-year-old. My family didn't have anything. My father worked as a plumber, and my mother worked as a bookkeeper. I went to a public school at the very beginning. I learned everything in school. All I heard about is how bad it was in the old country and how good it was here, how this was the land of opportunity. And it was. My father was able to work. My mother was able to work. They were able to buy a house. They were able to pay for my tuition to go to NYU. They gave me everything, and still do. We have an incredible relationship. I'm very lucky. But I think that we have everything here. And I think, to be honest, I think it's pretty nihilistic and destructive. And I don't really see a vision. I just see destruction.
Yeah. Right. I mean, it's frustrating as a parent because you're like, if I could just wring the neck of whoever orchestrated this and took this from my children, I would do it. But it's more of a mind virus that did this. And that's harder to target unless we all see it and face what it costs these children. So tell me a little bit about your experience being demonized as someone who was speaking against school closures. And I think history has vindicated you, but let's go back to you and your cohorts who were brave enough to say, this is not right for our children.
I will. I just want to add one more thing. Martin Gurry, who is in our film, he's a former CIA media analyst. He wrote a book called The Revolt of the Public, and he kind of it was a prescient book that precipitated Trump's ascent. Talked about populism. He talked about the BLM movement and how, Andrew Cuomo would come out and say, okay, guys, you've won. What is your vision? What do you want to build? And there's never something positive. It's always like, no, tear it all down. But
punishment,
when it comes to
reparations,
there's no building. There's no building, and I think that's the problem here too. So thank you for letting me add that. Martin Gurry is an incredible thinker, and we were very lucky to have him in the film. My background, as I said, I came from the Soviet Union. We came from nothing. Went to NYU. I think, for most of my life, I've been a Democrat. I've occasionally voted for a Republican, but, I harassed my parents when Barack Obama ran and said, if you don't go out and vote for Barack Obama, you don't care about my future. Oh my God. Talk about extortion.
Yes, but
terrible.
I mean, those of us in our 20s who are idealistic,
Yeah.
I get it.
By the way, they admitted to me recently that they didn't do it. So they were like, by the way, we never voted for him. And I was like, okay, good. I did. But yeah, I think that having come from a repressive totalitarian regime, and especially as a Jew, I'm Jewish. I have a very strong Jewish identity. I've spent considerable amounts of time in Israel. I have family there. I understand how precious freedom is, and our family has been scattered all around the world because the Soviet Union was such a disaster. It was so hard to live there. My father talked about the fact that he'd wait online to get me some milk when I was a toddler. There was nothing to eat. There was nothing. So I have a slightly different perspective on hardship, maybe, even though I didn't personally experience it. I lived with the stories, and my children still hear them. So I spoke out about school closures pretty early. It wasn't a decision I made. It was an imperative. I couldn't stop. I remember seeing my then 5-year-old's backpack hanging on a hook in our coat room, and just watching it day after day, and it didn't move. And I kept saying to myself, this is wasted opportunity. This is a child
It's like a mockery.
who needs to be.
Yeah.
That backpack is always in my head. It's this purple North Face backpack. And I always looked at it, and I was like, another day that this backpack is hanging on this hook. This is really a tragedy. She's not the only child. They need to be together. So when I spoke out, I certainly didn't expect any sort of backlash. I thought, we're just going to call our representatives. We're going to present the evidence, kind of like Jay Bhattacharya said. I did the research. I wanted to know what the infection fatality rate was when it seemed like it was safe. Like, we had to say, come on, let's go. We need to, bring the kids back. But there was nothing. Like, the electeds wanted nothing to do with us. We would have rallies, and the counter rallies, they would be holding up signs like saying, "Won't die for the DOE," or they would call us white supremacists. We had a rally in Harlem, okay, in East Harlem, which is a very Black and brown community. We were welcomed there by the community because the kids were playing sports and the parents really wanted them to go back to school and to normal sports. This is a different league. And we were there with this community. And still, the teachers union, I assume, because I don't know who else it would be, showed up with white supremacy with a hug sign. It was bizarre. I mean, there were people who were thrown off by it. I kind of just thought it was ludicrous, and I just kept going.
Right. I mean, that's brave though, because I think when we look back 5 years, these kind of words were weaponized, and they still carried weight at the time. Yeah. Racist, white supremacist, anti-Semite, all of those things still were able to land, and now they're used to shut down all manner of discussions, and we almost don't hear them any longer. Yeah. So they've thwarted their ability to weaponize these words. Let's talk about what you really show in the documentary, especially in the beginning, the heavy cost of children and the reason why we can't forget it. Because now teachers are saying the kids have recovered. They're okay now. It's all right now. We don't need to see it anymore. But why do you think we do?
Well, for one thing, they're still weakening education in every sense of the word. Ever since schools reopened, we've seen an encroachment of technology into classrooms, kind of a departure of the teachers and the really embodied, education system that our kids really need. I think they're doing, smart boards and iPads like from kindergarten and up, which is insane. In my opinion, there's no data to support that this is a good way for kids to learn. In fact, there's data on the contrary. But also, they're still trying to reduce the number of school days that kids go to school. I've seen countless articles from around the country where the teachers' unions are pushing a shorter school week. What? I mean, parents need to go to work. Parents cannot leave their children at home unattended. That's one reason. But also, I mean, we've seen that every strata of child, every strata of parent was impacted by the pandemic. Surely the lower socioeconomic classes had it the worst, and it was catastrophic for them. But some of the families we interview are families of means. And you hear their children talking about the fact that they didn't even have enough bandwidth that all the children could use, their Zoom school simultaneously. So the littlest one is saying there wasn't enough bandwidth. Dad could go to work on Zoom. My older brother could go to school, and there wasn't anything left for me. What kind of a message did that send to that child? I mean, this is not a first world problem. Like, that child was told that child didn't matter, that school was not essential. Thank goodness that this child had parents who reinforced other values. But I think what children have learned over the course of those 5 years, both when schools were closed, but also when they came back and had to remain masked and distanced. My children ate lunch outside on a cold concrete sidewalk in the middle of January because the teachers' unions had negotiated a contract where they were allowed to not be in the same space with the child while they were unmasked. So the child couldn't take a drink of water in the classroom. The child couldn't eat lunch near a teacher. The child had to sit outside in the cold concrete in January and eat their cold sandwich. That is not right, and that is not equitable. And there was no equity that came out of this pandemic.
Right. And so I guess let's wrap up our discussion with who is still benefiting from that having happened, and what can we do as parents? I think, you maybe didn't realize this about yourself and you jumped right in. Maybe you did. And you were like, I can't abide this. You've just tapped into my mama bear and I'm not going to let this go. I think maybe that can continue. And I think that that's, for me, like, I don't let a lot slide in their education. There's their poor teachers are going to get long emails from me if they put BS into their lessons. Unfortunately, that kind of stuff, it persists. And so that's the silver lining, is we can continue to learn to do that. And we've been empowered to do that, those of us who fashion ourselves independent thinkers. But then who is still benefiting from this having happened and us not continuing to ask the questions?
Well, in terms of sectors, ed tech is benefiting very, very much. The teachers unions, they got $189.5 billion to reopen the schools. That's how much, between the two administrations, that's how much was given just to schools to reopen. And that money went off into all sorts of areas, not really education, nothing that's benefited our children. But I think that, I think it's important for teachers to know that they don't need to be parts of unions. They can leave the unions. There was a Supreme Court decision called the Janus decision not that many years ago that enabled teachers to leave unions. I think that would be a great step, like to dismember the union, public sector unions, negotiate against themselves. Like, we need to be able to create choice in education. School choice is another thing. Everybody should be able to decide, whether a charter school or a private school, what the best learning option is for their kids. We should not immediately funnel them into these public schools that are run by the teachers unions, essentially. But in terms of something parents can do, I mean, to me, it's actually quite simple. It's something my grandmother would have been able to, explain. It's not very complicated and it's not expensive. Number one is have conversations about everything with your kids. They should be exposed to all of these concepts, whether it's gender issues or race or any other questions. Those are conversations that should have been had at the dinner table. So that means eating together at least once, twice, 3 times a week. I mean, I dare say like every day for dinner, but that's hard because people work and I understand their limitations. But bringing kids home and showing them that home is like where the heart is, right? The parents, they're your best friends, they're your allies. We don't live in intergenerational households anymore, but if there is any opportunity to bring kids closer to the elderly, again, a cost-free thing to do. Show them, meet their grandparents, have conversations with them, give them perspective, help them to understand history, that they're not alone and that they are part of trajectory and that there are people who really care about them and their future. That's what I would do.
Well, I appreciate that a lot. You can watch the documentary for free. Again, it's called 15 Days, The Real Story of America's Pandemic School Closures. And yeah, we can't forget. And I think that, for a lot of us, it's a tough, if you did not fight the administrations, if you did not speak up, you have to ask yourself, what did I think? What didn't I question? And what can I learn from that about myself as well? Because it's a tough mirror if you didn't. Like I said, I sort of went along with it and thought a bunch of dumb things. And it was a tough pill to swallow when you learned that there was no science behind what they were doing, that they didn't really have a plan, that they were lying about a lot of things. And so you have to learn that. And if you don't, well, then God help you if you refuse. So where else would you like people to check out after this documentary?
Sure. You can follow us on X at Restore Childhood. It's missing the E because it's too long of a name. So it's Restore Childhood on X for information on where it's currently running. And you can also go to 15daysfilm.com to find out more information on the film and how to access it.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for coming on to tell us about this. It really was a pleasure to talk to you again.
It's great to talk to you too. Thank you.